Hello and welcome to the Life by Design podcast, brought to you by Strategic. This podcast is all about helping you live your great life. Each episode will feature insights from our Chief Investment Officer, Doug Walters. Hello and welcome back to the Life by Design podcast. I'm here again with Doug.
Hey Jay, how are you?
Fantastic. And so today's podcast, I had a question for Doug that I wanted to ask him. And it's, how do I know if my investments are doing well?
That is a great question and a loaded question, really.
Yeah.
There are a lot of aspects to this. It's not quite as easy as you might think. So let's dive into it.
Please.
And I would say, let's start sort of quantitative and talk about benchmarks.
Okay.
All right. It is important, if you're going to understand if you're doing well, to have a good benchmark.
And that is, so just as an example, if I don't know what benchmark is, it's just something I'm comparing against, correct?
Right, okay. Right, exactly. And it is important to make sure you're comparing like for like.
Okay.
So, first we have to understand what are we trying to achieve with your investments? So are you a conservative investor? Are you an aggressive investor? Hopefully we're going to work with you to figure that out. We're going to understand your willingness to take on risk. We're going to assess your ability. Maybe you're skittish about risk, but you're young and you're making lots of money. And we're like, no, you can afford to take a lot of risk. We're going to come to some agreement about what the right investment strategy is for you. And let's say that ends up being a growth strategy, which we would define as being 75% in more risky assets like equities and 25% in more conservative assets like fixed income.
Okay.
So we're going to want to make sure going forward that we benchmark ourselves against an appropriately risked benchmark. So something that is 75% equities, call it the S&P 500, or more broadly, the Russell 3000, or more broadly, the MSCI World, which is an even better benchmark, and then 25% in an aggregate bond index. So now we're looking at real like for like, a growth benchmark versus a growth strategy. So that's a good starting point for comparison.
Okay. So I come to Strategic. They ask me a bunch of questions to figure out where my risk tolerance is. And for those of you that didn't hear it, last week we did an episode on all the different variations of risk,
right,
that you need to be ready for. This is just a specific one. And so we've assessed my risk. We've benchmarked it. So now what? What should I be looking for? What should I be asking my advisor about?
Right. So now, I guess on top of that, you're going to have a philosophy, right? So you're going to hopefully be bought into the philosophy that your advisor is bringing to the table. For us, that's evidence-based investing. So that's going to be the backdrop for which we are creating our portfolios to compare to this benchmark. And then, so now as time goes on, you're going to start to get a comparison, right? You're going to see, how did this benchmark do versus my assets. And so what do you do with that information? And what we would say is you want to use it to ask questions.
Yeah.
So no investment manager is always going to be outperforming their benchmark. So it is important to understand, why they are outperforming or why they're not outperforming. So, a significant outperformance could be just as much of a red flag as a significant underperformance, but those are opportunities for questions.
Okay.
So, and the questions are very simple, which is, why am I outperforming? I outperformed our benchmark by 5%. Why? Can you explain why that is?
Yeah.
And if the answer is, well, this year we put half of your assets in Bitcoin and Bitcoin took off, that's probably not a very satisfactory answer unless that was, the agreed strategy. But if it was more along the lines of, hey, we agreed on an evidence-based approach to investing, that means a diversified portfolio with exposure to international. International has had a great year. and therefore you're outperforming, that's a much more satisfactory answer.
So let me ask you this, okay?
Yep.
Let's say I'm outperforming.
Yes.
Okay. Why am I rocking the boat by asking that question? What I'm saying is I'm outperforming. I'm doing well. So why is that a concern for me?
Well, you are, hopefully you have hired somebody that you trust.
Yep.
But it is in your right, and certainly it is good practice to ask those questions so that you understand and make sure that the assets are being invested the way that it was agreed.
Mm.
And that might be obvious. You can see your portfolio. It might be very obvious that, hey, we're doing exactly what we agreed. But it can't hurt to ask the question. You want to make sure that your advisor is following the path that was agreed. And if that's not the case, that's when you would, you might see deviations. And so whether it's up or down, it's an opportunity for a question.
And I guess too, is it also like alluding to the fact that even though I'm outperforming, I may be in like a riskier situation from a downside as well, right? Like it's up now, but it could be down, and that's
Yes. Oh, I see. Yeah.
or like the allocation is too high into one thing, even though it's outperforming. Like eventually, it's going to even out.
Right. And the Bitcoin example is the extreme. Yes. You outperformed by 5% because of that big allocation. That can very quickly go the other way. Bitcoin is not an asset that is backed by any sort of earnings or physical asset. So in theory, it could go to zero, and you would want to know if half of your assets were in Bitcoin.
Right. And I know we've talked about this, so I just want to clarify here because, and I know we've maybe down talked crypto a little bit, and and it isn't that it's good or bad. It's just that like Doug is saying, there's just a lot of question marks behind it. And when we do evidence-based investing, it's stuff we know, right? And that's just, there's too many question marks.
Right.
Around that.
Crypto might fall into somebody else's philosophy. It doesn't fall into ours.
Mm-hmm.
So if a client of ours saw a big allocation to crypto, they should know that's a red flag. And, this team here is not following the philosophy that we had agreed on.
Yeah. Okay. So what's another question I should be asking myself or my advisor?
So what else should you be asking? I think if you, so I think we're kind of transitioning from quantitative side to sort of the real world. And what you want to ask your advisor is, how is the long term, what does the long term look like? Am I still on track to meet my goals for the long term? Because that is the ultimate benchmark, right? If we are sticking to our philosophy, we'll have some up years, some down years, but what you really want to know is, am I still on track to meet that retirement that I envision, to, pay for my kids to go to college, whatever those goals are they still on track?
Yeah, and I think something I like bringing up is that, and something I've been learning since I've been here, is that those are very individualized to you. And so, when we bring on a client, we have a very specific onboarding process that says, hey, what are your goals? Like, what does retirement look like for you? Like, are you going to travel 4 times a year? Do you plan, one of my favorite examples is, do you plan on living in a cabin, by yourself? Like, what are your goals? Because then that'll dictate the plan, whether you're on track, right? Like with those, it's all up to you and what you want to do. It's not arbitrary or just some dollar amount, it's what your goals are.
Right. And we have designed our strategy to try to meet those goals. And so ultimately, that is the biggest question. Are we still on track? Yeah, think about it a year, let's go back to COVID, right? Big decline in equities in a short period of time. Everything was down, right? We would have been, seeing a fall in our assets just like everyone else was. Am I still on track is the question.
Right.
Okay, given this big decline, am I still on track? Do I need to pivot? And yes, that goes hand in hand with the question, are we still following our philosophy, and are we doing what we said we were going to do, yes, that's still important. But given that we're doing that, again, the ultimate benchmark is, am I on track to retire to meet the goals that I laid out with you?
So just to kind of wrap it up a little bit, there's a couple different benchmarks per individual along the path of investing, which is starting off with what's your risk and how we're going to benchmark that. Then it's, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? How am I performing? And then also, am I on track for what I eventually wanted to, my eventual outcome?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So setting that risk allocation, agreeing on a philosophy, making sure that we continue to follow that philosophy, and is all of that put together, continuing to get us where we need to go?
Yeah.
That's the plan.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's great. I think that's all my questions, Doug. I really appreciate it.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Please see the full disclosure in our show notes for more information.